have to be able to process your own feelings to be in a place that you can go in and do this for your people. Like, where are you stopping and asking, what am I feeling? And whether it's journaling, whether it's talking to another person away from the team. Like, if you can't even process and understand what you're feeling, you're worried about taking their negative on, but actually you're projecting all kinds of things onto them. And that's why you can't be present in the first place to help them feel seen so that you can now try to help them move forward, right? And so what are you even doing to process your own feelings or acknowledge you have feelings going on?
Welcome to You Might Try This, a podcast about learning how to lead without losing yourself along the way. Hosted by executive coaches Stacy Philpott and Cade Cowan. This show draws on 25 years of experience working with high-level leaders and brings those lessons down to earth. If you're navigating leadership for the first time, managing people, questioning old rules, and trying to build a career that actually feels good, you're in the right place. This is You Might Try This, honest leadership advice for ambitious people who still want to sleep at night.
Welcome back to You Might Try This, the show for leaders who are figuring it out in real time. Today, we're going to be talking about something that is very hard to talk about, which is emotional pain. Whether it's loneliness from a promotion, the isolation when people aren't honest with you or talking real with you, or the pain of slowly burning out. The reality we know is that leadership is hard on the human being inside of the role. And the people you're leading, they are experiencing emotional pain too.
And that's certainly something that not a lot of people talk about once you become a manager. You know, your team's not coming to your office just with work problems. They come in with the weight of everything else. So this could be a parent's diagnosis. This could be a relationship falling apart, you know, a budget that got cut, a war that can't stop, that won't stop, and that they can't stop watching on the news. You know, they walk in carrying all of that, and you've got about 30 seconds to figure out what version of you is going to show up in the midst of all that pain.
And most of us, we know, default to kind of one or two moves when we realize that another person is in pain. We either jump to solutions to try to fix it, right, make it go away, or we swerve into cheerleading and reassurance. So we fix it or we reassure them. Both feel like leadership in the moment, but neither one works very, very well in the long term. Today's guest is going to offer some other solutions to try based on research he has done. And I believe, frankly, it is some of the most useful research I've come across in a very long time.
Yeah, Shawn Quinn runs the Positive Leadership Program at the Ross School of Business there at Michigan. He's the founder of Lift Consulting, and he's spent years studying what actually works when people walk into your office in pain and the sequence that matters in those moments. So, Shawn, welcome to You Might Try This.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's wonderful to have you.
Wonderful. It's great. It's great. Well, Shawn, I want to start with a concept that you talk about that I think is going to land very well with our listeners, and maybe even in a way that surprises them. At least it surprised me when you talked to me about it, which is this concept of professional pain. What do you mean by that? And how did you end up getting really interested in researching that?
Yeah, well, I'll go to the other first and then come back to what I mean by it. I was in a form of pain myself. I think I was in, some might say, a midlife crisis. I don't think it was crisis, but whatever leads to that, right? I think there was some feeling a little bit lost, wondering, is this it? Or, you know, what else do I need? Am I going to do in my career and life, whatever? But I was going through a form of pain and loneliness. And in that process, I started to ask some of my colleagues who were coaches, and I said, I need help me, ask me questions. And one thing that came out in that surprised me was people said, yeah, when you work with executives, you help them with whatever they're asking for. But I've noticed, and two people said this similar word, which I had never heard, when people work with you, they walk away feel more healed or in some form, right? And I'm like, well, if they have to heal, not surprisingly, that means there's pain going on in organizations. And that's not a big revelation to me, but consciously I then ask, well, what are the forms of pain? And then if there is pain, and they need healing. Are they healing or are they just coping? Because my experience told me a lot of people in organizations that experience pain are just coping. They're just feeling enough with it to be able to keep going, right? And so I just became interested. And so that's when I decided, let's interview people. And being part of the connected the Center for Positive Organizations, I added a question, right? One was, well, what form of pain are you experiencing? Are you healing or just coping? And then when have you experienced professional joy? Is there any kind of connection between the pain and the joy, which is another separate thing, but interesting in of itself. And so some told me, look, in the pain literature, it's trauma and suffering. And I was like, I don't love that because there's other forms of pain, right? I can choose to just leave my job and go to another organization. And that's hard because my network's gone. I'm seen as an expert in a certain way. Nobody's coming to me. So even though I want it and it will help me long term, it's a form of pain. Right now, with AI, with everything, the wars, everything we can mention, there's just uncertainty. The speed of change just continues to get more rapid. And so I may enjoy my job. I may like what I do, but that still wears me down. It still creates, whether people like the word pain or not, there's so many forms of pain. And so I wanted to keep it more open in the initial interviews because I was curious to even see where did the word pain take people, right? And it was a wide range of things. Sure, there was some suffering and trauma, but there was all kinds of things, from the uncertainty to, like I said, just the renewal piece that's needed. From, if I lift weights, I create pain for my body, but I've got to still then recover and renew. So even if it's conscious and intentional pain I'm creating for myself in good ways, we still need that recovery, right? So to me, pain kind of wraps around a whole set of different experiences that people have.
I mean, one of the things, Kate, I just want to say, when Shawn first mentioned this to me, is it made me realize how undiscussable emotional pain at work is, right? By just even saying professional pain, it was almost like, well, we're not supposed to have pain at work. That's what we do in our personal lives. And yet we spend so many hours at work. And I know I've had when I felt like a work relationship broke or didn't go well, or certainly the pain of not feeling completely at ease or included on a team. I mean, I think most of us have experienced it, but it's almost like we can't even really talk about it. And so what I love by even putting this out as a concept is it just points to the reality that we have pain at work.
Yes. And I also like that idea of deconstructing it beyond trauma, beyond suffering, and getting into, what are the other distinctions of pain? Because then that gives you, I would imagine, more ability to actually deal with it. Shawn, you're at Michigan, of course, the center of scholarship around positive organizations. Some listeners might assume that means, you walk into rooms and you tell leaders to focus on the positive. But I think your research actually shows something much different than that, or it shows the downside of simply focusing on the positive. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's one other thing to the origin that relates to this, right? Which is when we were looking at, so we did those initial interviews, then we did some assessments. And I was sitting with a colleague of mine, Jeff Bednar, who I got to know as a PhD student at Michigan. He's now at Brigham Young University. And he and Taya Howell have done this work with me. I'm sitting with Jeff. We're reviewing all these different stories of pain. And what became clear, interesting to us is, let's say I'm a woman or a minority in some form, and I get passed up for a job promotion. That sucks. They gave me feedback. It's painful, but I can take the feedback, try to get better, and be ready for the next opportunity. And that's fine. But then if I start talking to other, let's say in this case, women in the organization, and I start to realize the feedback wasn't real, there's something going on here about being a woman and having an opportunity. What's interesting is hope decreases and the pain becomes more chronic. And so then we became interested in what is it about the hope piece and all this. When we went back to the interviews, there was always something around hope, right? And so later you'll see hope's a big piece that we weave into some of this. That's a positive emotion, right? That's been studied. Now, that said, there were some other important pieces to your point, which is if I can't first, and I think anyone can resonate with this, whether they're the one feeling bad, whatever the bad is, or you're trying to help someone who's feeling bad. If someone comes in and starts trying to, oh, it's all okay, it's going to be fine, and you're still feeling this pain, right? And whether that's at work or let's say you lost a loved one, right? There's a reason that you need to go through mourning, right? There's negative emotion. I don't love the words negative or positive emotions because both can be positive and both can be negative in their outcomes, right? We need at times to mourn or to go through whatever, be angry, right? And so if I can't meet you there and help you feel seen in your pain, and we can get more into the brain and stuff, my brain is so full of whatever that the pain is about that I can't even hear you, or I feel you don't understand me. So why would I let you help me through it? And so we can't first meet with pain. And Kate and I were talking about this example, but the classic I use is a department chair I was working with that I've worked with and coached for a long time. When COVID hit, you can imagine what it meant to be a surgeon. All your surgeries are gone because now all of the rooms are being used for COVID patients. You just became a full-time teacher at home if you have kids, which is pretty big difference, right? And we could go on. Everyone remembers whatever your version of that was during COVID and the pain it created and the difficulty. And in fairness, this leader had been through a lot of tough experiences growing up. And in his going through that, he learned in the end, it doesn't help for me to dwell. So I just moved to positive reframe, which is great that that's where he's gotten to in life. And it really helps him, right? So he's trying to move to positive reframe with all these people in his department. And they're going, dude, you're too positive. You're too positive. Like, in other words, you're not helping sit with us in our pain and acknowledge it. And if you can't do that, there's only so much you can do for us as a leader in this case. And he adjusted. But I think that's so interesting, right? Is if you jump too quickly to the positive, people aren't going to go with you on the journey. And now you're not being helpful.
I mean, I got a couple of thoughts about that. One is I think someone brings you pain and you go too quickly to the positive. You just actually made that person feel even more isolated and alone with that, which actually increases the sense of pain. And then I got a lot of thoughts on the whole COVID. I mean, working with senior executives, I remember seeing online, like some of their office setups were pretty sweet. They had all of the resources available to them. The people that they were working with a few rungs lower in the organization were sitting at a kitchen table where their kid was trying to do math just next to them. So the executive's like, man, this is pretty good. I don't mind this working from home. Not the story of people elsewhere in the organization. So I think that is a really interesting example of where pain got ignored.
And though, let's also be clear, for some of those senior executives, it wasn't as sweet. It was they
of course not.
Whatever going on too, right? But yes, I hear you. And I it's back to the empathy piece. Can I first meet others where they're at and recognize?
Shawn, can you talk more about that sequencing? Because I do find that, there are two things in what you're saying. One is people often don't understand that providing reassurance is experienced as dismissiveness by the other. Mm-hmm. Okay. There's a difference around reassurance and dismissiveness. And I think part of it has to do with when you reassure someone, right? Can you, and what you've taught me is that how you sequence a conversation when someone is in pain matters. It's not just, advice like do this, don't do that. It's when you do it. And when, as you said in your example with that surgeon, is someone ready? How do you think about the sequencing of a conversation when you're with someone who's in professional pain?
Yeah. Or personal pain, quite frankly, because we want to separate personal from work. But if somebody's carrying that, it's impacting work. And so I think the first thing I'll say is one of the things is as managers, we generally speaking, the norm is you should be an expert. You should know everything. You should have the answers. You should solve all the problems for me. Right. And we get trapped in that mode where we're trying to solve the problems. And so that creates issues where I should be developing capacity and not solving the problems for people. in this case, professional pain, part of why I may be scared to even go there with people is because I don't have the answers. I don't know how to help someone who's going through a divorce, or I don't know how to help somebody who's having this issue with this person I don't have the issue with over in the other part of the organization, or whatever it is. But the first answer is you don't have to have the answer. In fact, that's the best, most helpful thing in this case. If it's pain or emotional, don't have the answer. First, just show you want to be with somebody and try to feel with them. Even if they want the answer, it's not what's helpful to them. What's helpful to them is to first see that you're trying to feel and understand where they're at and what they're going through. And the research shows if I can do that effectively, their brain actually opens up just a little bit of space. With that space, they have the capacity now for you to maybe take them places. And the truth is, you got to be careful, because you could have one conversation where you feel with them, and that's good. But if the pain's enough, they might need a few rounds of that. It doesn't necessarily have to always be for long periods. It can be for 3 or 4 minutes that I just listen and show that I'm interested in trying to understand what it must be you in this moment.
It's so interesting, because I think that what happens is people, Kate and I have talked on another show about how feelings we perceive them as contagious. And so what I see is that leaders don't want to sit in someone's pain because they're afraid they're going to catch it. They don't want to talk about feelings because they're afraid, if you show me fear and sadness and disappointment, I might feel those things. So let me reassure you, because I'm actually reassuring myself that I'm not going to experience those feelings.
That brings up another important point, Stacey, which is, I often joke, because I'll say to people, well, an executive, well, what are you feeling when you just tell me about that situation, right? And then they start to describe to me and analyze, and I go, whoa, whoa, whoa. No, what are you feeling? And it's like they can't even give me a feeling. They're human, right? Literally, you can't have a thought. The thought is a feeling before it becomes a thought, right? So feelings are so involved. It's funny to me how we try to process out feelings, right? But it's impacting everything that's going on in every room, in every individual. That's why often you see in the framework that I have, you have to be able to process your own feelings to be in a place that you can go in and do this for your people. Like, where are you stopping and asking, what am I feeling? And whether it's journaling, whether it's talking to another person away from the team. Like, if you can't even process and understand what you're feeling, you're worried about taking their negative on, but actually you're projecting all kinds of things onto them. And that's why you can't be present in the first place, to help them feel seen, so that you can now try to help them move forward, right? And so what are you even doing to process your own feelings or acknowledge you have feelings going on? Because actually what you're really scared of by listening to someone else is it's going to surface some of what you're really actually feeling. I mean, fear is so prevalent in organizations, and leaders pretend it's not true. I'm not afraid of anything, or at least I need to be seen that way. Please, we're all afraid of stuff. And leaders are definitely afraid of plenty of things, or whatever other feeling they're dealing with.
Hey, Shawn, there's an important distinction in your work that I think it's important to parse out. You know, Amy Edmondson's term, psychological safety, it's become this all-encompassing term for anything that has to do with allowing someone to, show up in a vulnerable way. But and we've talked about her work on the show, and one of the things that Stacey and I have tried to do on this show is get back to what the real root of psychological safety is. And so, can you help people understand that what you're talking about is not necessarily psychological safety? There's a distinction in there. We just want to be pure on that term.
Well, I don't even know that it has to be completely separated out. I think there's some aspects that are related, right? I would say it this way. First, let's look at what was the question being asked in both cases. Psychological safety, my version of it, I just kind of jotted down, right? Is she was asking, why do some teams learn from mistakes while others miss or repeat or whatever else, right? That's her fundamental question. My fundamental question was simply, is there pain, and are people healing from that pain or working through it so that they can be more productive and more hopeful and more whatever else and move forward more effectively? In the first layer, the part we've already been talking about, emotional processing, emotional connection is how I term it, is a form of psychological safety. So it doesn't have to be just, but when you look at Amy's work, there's other things that she would focus on that I'm not talking about here because it's a team trying to get them to talk openly. If you do some of the stuff I'm talking about around pain, is it going to help enhance psychological safety for the team and the willingness to talk about other things as well? Absolutely. So I don't think it has to be separated out. But I'm focusing on one aspect for a certain purpose to then set up other things that aren't necessarily talked about by Amy as well. That again, you could argue probably only helps a team be more psychologically safe. So I don't want to completely distinguish them, but I think because we're asking different questions, we might focus on different aspects or hit on different things altogether in some cases of what she might mention and what I might mention. And yet there's some things that would be tied together, like empathy, like the ability to understand the other people and whatnot. So that's more the way I think about it personally.
And one might imagine that if a leader is good at helping an individual sit with that pain, they can sit with that pain alongside them. That same leader is probably pretty good at establishing the conditions whereby the team has psychological safety.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And with pain, there are times the whole team's experiencing something that's painful. Mm-hmm. And rather than just try to sit one-on-one, you may want to acknowledge some things as a team, or quite frankly, it could be a lot of individuals having different kinds of pain, but by learning, and I've tried different exercise and workshops to allow people to just name their pain. And even if you do it in anonymous ways so they don't know who else in the room is saying what, that in of itself helps people feel less lonely. There's others going through hard things, some of which is the exact same thing, some of which isn't. That in of itself makes me feel better to know I'm not alone. And if it's something that's common we're going through, it's better to name it together anyway and to feel it together and see that the leader understands it, like the COVID situation, right? Even though there's some common things and then there's some individualized things that were happening for people in that.
You know, Shawn, I'm reminded of a CEO that I supported once who, this was on the tails of COVID. He sat with his team. I was present. He said, I just want to start the meeting by saying this has been the toughest year that I've ever experienced personally. He said, and it makes me wonder, how are all of you today? Mm-hmm. And he said, I'd like to hear, how are all of you today? And then he just fell silent and went around the table. And it was astonishing. I mean, grown men wept. And that conversation took about 90 minutes for about 10 people. And it was incredibly cathartic. And there were just, I think, things happened on the back end of that meeting with that team and the way that they felt in the presence of one another that had not happened before. So I'm just thinking of that as you're talking about this idea of oftentimes teams experience collective pain. And, how do you help process that?
Yeah. And that's a beautiful example. Right? I'm not assuming anything, but I am owning my experience and I'm inviting to check in to show I care enough. I just want to see, right? He wasn't assuming
that's right.
He just was owning his and opening up the possibility and being there in case it was needed. And it clearly was, right? Mm-hmm. And then how does that only help us moving forward? You don't want to stay there forever, right? Someone who's lost a loved one who stayed too long in the mourning, right? You need to mourn, but it's like at some point you have to move on, right? It's hard to be happy in life, right? But if you can't make space for it sometimes, and knowing the difference, right? We're not doing this every meeting and all the time, right? That wouldn't be helpful either, right? It's knowing what are those moments, recognizing there's a moment here, whether for myself or this person or whatever that I'm sensing, or that I need to stop and do some of this work.
I was thinking too, I had two thoughts there. One is, gosh, there's a moment of positivity from COVID that I forgot. I remember so much uncertainty and the crisis of getting on. Kate, I know you and I working together, we would kind of get our colleagues together and just do a call to be like, how is everyone doing? And it's funny, I'm like, we don't really do that as much anymore. And that crisis allowed people's emotional experience to come into work. And it's funny, when I work with teams now, one of the first things we do is, and I'm always trying to figure out, how do I allow a team to be appropriately vulnerable? Like, forced vulnerability doesn't necessarily lead to intimacy because there can be a counter reaction. But one of the things I do is I simply, as a team, I say, look, I want you to give me a number on a scale of 1 to 10 about how you're doing as a person. You can think about how are you doing professionally, but also how are you doing physically? How are you doing relationally? If spirituality is important to you, how are you doing spiritually? As a whole human being, what is the number? If people want to share why that's their number, right, you can feel free to. But first, we're just going to get a number. It is the safest way to get people to realize it. And when I'm working with the team, I say, listen, if you were a sports team, not that we want me to really go into sports analogies, Kate, but let's just pretend. If you were on a sports team, at least what I've heard about sports teams.
What's your RBI?
Right. It's like, if you were on a sports team and you had a player who was injured, wouldn't you want to know before you go out onto the field? Right. So we hide our pain, but then if somebody's injured on the team and you don't know, you're not going to operate well as a team. And so there are safe ways that you can assess. When teams get more connected, then I say, give me your number now. Tell me why you're that number. Anyway, well, so Shawn, can you talk a little bit more about your actual framework? I know, because I think this is really interesting what you've come up with, and there are, 3 distinct phases. And can you just make sure our listeners know what are those phases, and then help us understand how someone might run through those in a real life setting, if you will?
I will do that. And I got to make one comment about your sports. I've seen events where somebody's had a pretty bad injury on the court or whatever. And I've seen the difference between a coach who pulls people together and tries to deal, and those who are like, let's help him off or her off, whatever. And then we got to keep playing. And you can see the difference because these are people that know each other well now. They're basically living together on the road, whatever else. And if you didn't give me space to deal with it, that's what's on my mind instead of the game. That's no different than in the work setting. How often do we have people that are having trouble staying focused on what I as a manager need them to do because I never took the time, like some coaches, to actually, you know what, that just happened. That's someone we know. And now we're worried for them. How do we deal with that? How do we make space for that? Right. I mean,
it's impressive. I remember, okay, now I'm going to be a mama bear. So I remember, this is unrelated, but I remember when my son was really young and he was playing soccer. And he said to me once, he goes, Mom, I may not be the best player on the team, but whenever someone is hurt, I always go and kneel down next to them until the coach gets there so they know they're not alone. And I was like, oh my God, I love you. I was like, what a mama wants to hear. But I was like, but it's true with a team. It's like, are you going to be the person who shows up when someone else is hurt and you sit with them until some help gets there? Or are you just going to keep doing your own thing? Right. And don't we need more people who were there for each other? Right.
Because when I get hurt, whatever that means, I experience pain. Am I worried that I'm going to be left alone? Or do I see that when it happens on this team, someone's going to step up, whether the coach, manager, or a peer, or your son, right? It changes a lot of stuff. Whoever's leading in that moment, it doesn't matter who's leading. That's why I love teaching it and saying, sure, understand this as a manager, but if your people understand it, they can be there for each other as well. Because great teams, we know, have people leading each other all the time. It's not just the formal leader. All right.
Framework. Tell us. Yes. Look at that. We did a sport. We did a sport. All right. Go for it, Shawn. Tell us about the framework.
Yeah. So the framework, I always say, right, that in this case, whatever form of pain is entering in, we know that whether it is the suffering, whether it's the trauma, whether it's uncertainty, whether it's whatever it is, the brain is in protective mode, basically. How do I protect self? When that happens, the mindset, I'm going to overly simplify it, mindset narrows. I take care of self because I need to preserve and all those things. And so it's hard for me to think differently and now here's the irony. When we're uncertainty, when we're going through hard things as a team or an organization, this is when I need your best self. I need you creative. I need you proactive. But the brain doesn't work that way. When I feel under threat or I feel pain, I'm doing the opposite. I'm taking care of self. I'm protecting, right? And so even if I'm a manager who says, I'm here, we're here, we pay you to get work done, right? Great. But if your people have their minds functioning like this, they're not helping you, especially in uncertainty. And they're definitely not collaborating together. They're definitely not working through problems together. They're not having the psychological safety Amy talks about, right? So I can say this, I'm not a therapist, I'm a manager. Okay, great. And don't do as well as a manager in your performance. Up to you. Sorry to be blunt, but that's the reality.
I like it.
You're not a professional. So I said, well, what's the frame? What can they do to be helpful? Right. And we've talked about the first two of the first parts, right? Am I processing my own emotions and where am I making space for that? And that's why I think journaling, even if people don't love it, I'm telling you, if you just journal or you find that friend you can go talk to and just talk through what are you feeling, but be clear. What are you actually feeling? Why are you feeling that way? Again, even if you don't solve any of it, just acknowledging it and talking it through and feeling seen by yourself in the journal or talking to a friend, you're going to be in a better place as a manager to help the people you lead. Then there's the emotional connection. How do I make sure I'm connecting when it's needed to the individual or the group? And we've discussed that a lot. One example I often use when I'm with a group is I just say, hey, write down something. Don't put your name on it. Just write down what's a form of pain you're dealing with, whether it's at work, at home, both, whatever. Pass it all in, then I pass it back out and I say, just read off. So nobody has to feel they're connected to the pain. And it's amazing. They're nervous. Then they read off the pain. They're like, oh, I feel seen. I'm not alone. All these things start to happen. It's amazing. Whether they then want to talk more or whatever else, I often will then give them opportunities, get in pairs. Now, just for 4 minutes, you can just share more if you want to, or something you're dealing with. The other person, and this would be the manager, like you're just there to hear, to restate, and not just to restate what they're saying, but try to feel what they're feeling. Don't solve the problem. Just be fully present. That's all and they practice, because all this stuff, practice helps you, right? And then the last is do I feel safe that I can talk to my manager or my teammates? And so what kind of things do you need to do? And if I'm with a group, I'll just say, hey, who are the people you felt safe around? People know the answers. You just have to help them unpack their own experiences. There's people they feel safe. There's people they don't feel safe. One person said, I had a manager once who would always say right up front, is this coffee time? Or I forget the other thing they said. The one is like, do you want my help solving the problem? Or am I here just to listen and be present for you? And they said, it helped me feel safe because I knew I could come either way. And when I just needed to be heard, I could say, hey, coffee time. And he'd be like, great, let's go have coffee time. Whatever that is, how do we unpack and understand ourselves? Who makes me feel safe and what can I do for my team or others on my team to do those things? And we could walk through them, but I really believe the knowledge sits within us. We just have to take the time to be aware of it. If and only if I create that foundation, people are then ready to move to the next phase in the framework. And even when I've done that and they're ready to move, let's say it's someone I'm coaching, I'll often come on to the next coaching session and ask a few questions just to find out, are we still good there? Is there something new that I need to go back to and help them feel heard? Oftentimes there's not. So after I do a quick feel, I'm like, all right, now let's move to the next phase. And I do this quickly, go through some of it because sometimes they're fine, right? And I don't need to do anything. But the next phase is, especially in uncertainty, and I'll hit on that one because it's such a real thing for everybody right now. But in general, in pain, it's true, but it's really true in uncertainty. How do I now anchor you? So I'm not going to go to sleep on a boat if I'm not anchored, because like when I wake up, I could be anywhere, right? So I put the anchor down It doesn't mean the boat doesn't move around. But I know I'm not going to float off in the ocean or wherever, right? So emotionally, how are we anchoring people? Now, there's a lot of ways we can do this, right? Personally, I might, if it's a coaching and I've done some work already with them on their purpose or values, that's a good place to anchor people, right? What won't change in my life is basically what we're asking. Well, I can choose to stay true to my values or purpose, regardless of what's happening around me, regardless of the pain I'm going through. I literally have done exercises. I learned this one from my dad, actually. He had an exercise where he'd say, what's not changing in your life? I literally want you to list everything. Are you going home to the same place? Is the same dog waiting for you, or the same partner, or same children, or whatever? Literally list. Are you using the same laptop? It seems silly, but when you get people to list everything that's not changing in their life, and then they share it with each other, I've seen teams literally, I feel the ease come in. Like, we're so worried about everything that we can't control that we forget, like, here's all the things that isn't changing. And then that can include purpose and values. I sometimes, with groups, if I've got a group, I'll just say, tell me the biggest difference you've made to the client, to the internal, external client. I connect them back to purpose, even if it's not their individual purpose. They'll sit around and tell 4 stories, 4 of them. And by the end, they're going, oh yeah, like, we make a big difference every day, no matter what else is going on. Like, and it reconnects them to meaningful things, right? And it's interesting to me how that just anchors people. It puts them at a little more ease. So now I felt heard in my pain. That opens my brain just a little more. Now you've anchored me. It opens my brain just a little bit more. Now, if they're ready for that, right? Remember, sometimes someone I've heard, and I've got to stay at that bottom layer a little longer for some people before I then move to even anchoring. But now if they're ready, now if they're anchored, now their brain's a little more open. Now I do something to try to introduce some positive emotions, because we know from the research, right? Positive emotions opens the mindset, broadens your thinking, where negative emotions narrow it. So now I may venture in. And so if it's a group, I'm just sharing examples in the group, I may say, hey, who else in the room's done something you can give feedback to that you really value and appreciate what they've done, right? Or individually, I might ask them, hey, what's something that's happened in your life that you're grateful for, or whatever, something that starts to induce some positive emotion. So I open their mindset. Now I may start to venture into some questions around reframing, because now I've prepared and helped them be ready to positively reframe and to rethink what's another way I could view this or think about this or whatever else, right? And so once we've anchored, now we're trying to manage their perception, the way they're seeing things, the way they're viewing their emotions, all kinds of stuff, right? Once I've done that, now I move where a lot of managers or leaders want to go in the beginning, right? Which is action, get stuff done. We're rewarded and moved up in the organization for taking action, fixing problems. And this is where the hope theory comes in, as we start to see the role of hope. And we're like, hope theory is important, but actually creating hope has other things. And that's where these other 2 layers became important, rather than jumping right into the hope theory. And in hope theory, the 2 pieces I mentioned at this point is, all right, what's a meaningful goal I can focus on that I can control? Now, what's interesting is in some of the interviews I did, there were things in the organization they didn't feel they could control that was causing significant pain. But when they told what was helping them, they might have created a meaningful goal. One person went and helped in the community with youth. But that meaningful goal of something they could control was actually helping them heal from what was happening in the organization, so they could show up better in the organization, even though they couldn't change some of the things that were going on. But I would argue, even inside the organization, even if it's, I'm going to find 2 other people and help them feel better today just for a few minutes, whether that's listening to them, whether that's saying something nice, whether that's whatever, I can control that. So if I have a meaningful goal, now ideally the meaningful goal is related to the work I need to do as well, which often there are things we can control. And sometimes when I have them share what's the difference you have made, they remember, oh, we are still making a difference. There are things we can control. Okay, so what's the meaningful goal? And then it's what's called pathway thinking in the hope literature, which is now come up with as many actions as you could take to start working towards that goal. You don't even have to take all the actions. The more I realize, though, there are actions I can control and take, the more hopeful I feel. And the more I start to feel better about things, the more I can start to heal, right? And so that's the top layer, is those meaningful goals, pathway thinking. Can I believe I can take action that makes a difference in something that matters to me? That's huge in helping me feel better about things, more hopeful, and begin to heal more. Now, I've also started to move into a proactive place instead of a reactive. I've moved into a more likely, as I think and have hope, I can be more creative because I realize I can have impact and I can make a difference on certain things. I'm more open to new ideas, whatever else, and so on and so forth. That's the general idea and the flow of the framework. So I'll pause, see what questions or what things that raises.
Yeah, tremendously helpful. Shawn, would you imagine that, someone's suffering a fair amount of pain? Not all of that. I guess all of that could happen in the same conversation. And then there perhaps are times where you have to take it more slowly than that. Yes?
For sure. Yeah. And that's the hard part. This is where I get it, right? I get it. Like manager going, oh, I could dare in the headlights. Look, like you want me to what? But just like when you became a manager and learned how to give hard feedback, or when you became a manager and felt alone, or, a lot of things you've probably already addressed on this podcast and will continue to address, they weren't amazing at it at first. Like you're going to get some of this wrong, but here's the thing. People know if you care and if you're trying. They can forgive mistakes when they know your heart's in the right place and you're trying and you're adjusting and showing you're learning.
That's a really good reminder.
So go into it and say, all right, I can tell there's something going on. How do I breathe? And part of it can be, look, I don't even know what I'm doing here. I sense something's wrong and I'm worried about you. And I just want you to know I'm here if you just want to talk about it. We don't need to solve anything. I just want you to know I care. Acknowledge you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
But show them you care and want to be there. And then say, hey, at the end, hey, I'm so sorry. This is what I said. Is this kind of what you're feeling, what you're going through? And they may say, no, you still didn't get it. Okay, help me get it right. And even if you do get it right, just pay attention. Do they feel a little more open and ready? Or no, I'm not pushing beyond that at this point. I'm just going to keep checking in for a little while. You'll start to get the sense of when it's time to move on and when it's not, especially in the one-on-one. In the group, it's a little harder because when it's work related and we still have work to do, we do have to move at some level. So I need to make space for it, but it's going to be harder to not move on at some level. I probably have to move on. So there's nuances to all of this that you got to just try. But that's where if you're journaling, you're not only your own feelings and processing, you're learning. Because we know from the literature, the way you grow as a leader, a manager, or even a parent or a friend, is you have to have new experiences outside of what you're used to. You have to reflect on those experiences and make sense of it, and then adjust and try again. Otherwise, you're going to revert to what you know.
Shawn, is there a version of this that you can run on yourself? I think about the people that might be listening to this podcast. We've targeted this toward people who perhaps are kind of leaders for the first time. And, a lot of times that comes with a whole new set of expectations, and yet you've still got to hold it all together and look okay while you're doing it. And so if an individual is in pain, can they work this on themselves if there's nowhere else to turn?
Yeah, I think so. That's so one, I can journal no matter what. But two, it doesn't have to be someone in my organization, or maybe there is somebody in my organization that I can go and just flat out say, I need you to be the coffee person right now. I do not want a solution. Just set the expectation. I just need someone who can listen and try to understand what I'm going through, who's not really in it, right? I think you need to go find those people or create those people in your life, whether it's in your organization or outside the organization, and be clear what you need. Right now, I just need someone to hear me. I I'm feeling a lot of pain. I'm frustrated. I'm whatever it is, right? Are you okay if I just unpack for 5-10 minutes and just hear and be with me? I really don't need anything else. So what are you doing to process your emotions with someone else and create that connection? You need the connection. The human beings, no matter how much you think I'm a strong executive and I can show no weakness, you feel things, you need to be seen. There are way too many people in organizations who aren't seen. And if you don't feel seen, you're not going to do a good job helping others feel seen, right? So go and ask for it. So find that person you feel safe with, right? Slowly build that bottom layer with whoever you think you can build it with, and do it until you find who those people are and build it and say, I'm here for you if you ever need it, right? And so proactively create that. And then you can say, I can anchor myself. I can list my values. I can list the things that aren't going to change. Yeah, but it's not always easy to live my values. I don't want to lose the job right now, and it feels unsafe and whatever. Okay. Well, there's a whole set of good questions to ask yourself then, right? When are you losing yourself and it's not worth the job? Yeah, I get it. There's some countries, US, there's times it's harder to find jobs than others. But generally speaking, if you're any good, there's opportunities out there, right? If you literally are being asked to not be able to stay true to your values to where you're slowly dying, you're not going to be good for that organization soon anyway. So there's nuances again that's why sometimes it's helpful to have a coach, but I can still learn to anchor myself and to say what isn't changing and what can I do to put myself a little more at ease. And then I can do things to induce positive emotions. I had a colleague who literally collected all these videos, and she'd go to one meeting that she knew would suck the life out of her. It was just the people she was with, but she had no control over it. She'd go back to her meeting, to her office between meetings because she didn't want to bring that negativity to the next group. And she'd watch 2 or 3 of those videos until literally she felt differently. And then she'd go into the meeting differently. I can manage what I'm feeling. I can ask, we have AI now. Give me 20 reframe questions I should ask myself. This is the situation, right? I can review and reflect on those questions or bring them to someone else, say, help me ask these kinds of questions. I can find things I can control.
Shawn, one of the things Kate and I try really hard to do is come up with sort of experiments or very pragmatic things that people can try tomorrow, next week, but, very, very quickly and simply. And as I'm listening to you, I thought maybe I'll just list a couple of things I'm going to try and remind myself. And Kate, maybe you want to do the same. I mean, first of all, in listening to you, I'm going to remind people, myself and my clients, that part of the reason you need to be able to listen to people's feelings is it opens up their brain. In a world that values cognition over emotion, sometimes we need to explain to people, if you do this, if you sit with these emotions, then your people are going to have more brain power. So that's one thing. I think the second thing is I'm going to remind people.
And you are too.
Yes. And then I think the other thing is to remind people, like, emotions aren't really that catching. Like, you can sit with someone who's in pain, and that doesn't mean you're in pain. Like, people are often afraid to be in the presence of another person's discomfort more than they realize. And so get comfortable with being with someone else's pain, because that's where connection and innovation and all the things we say we want live. Is if you can connect with other people as humans. Work is relational. And if you're not willing to experience and be with someone in a different emotional state, you're only going to get a little teeny piece of them. And to those things. And then the last thing I'm going to say, and then Kate, I'm going to turn it over to you, is I love the question about what is not changing in my life. When I think about how anchoring that can be when you're going through a tough time, I know when I've gone through really tough times, it feels like the world, everything is changing, right? So to stop and go, okay, let's get grounded. What are the things that aren't changing? I love that. I don't know, Kate, what about you? What are you thinking?
I think a simple experiment that people can run is very similar to the story that I told about the CEO that I'd supported. And that is, inside of a team meeting that you're responsible for, can you ask the question, how are you today? Let's hear, how is everyone today? And then create some space to actually let people go there. I think that's a very easy experiment to run. You've got to tailor it for yourself so that it sounds authentic to you. But some version of that, I think, could be really interesting.
And he shared first.
Mm-hmm.
He shared what his pain was, right, before he invited others to go there.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Well, Shawn, just any other, thoughts or kind of final closing advice for our listeners that you want our listeners to be aware of?
Yeah, well, one thought I was having when you were talking, actually, I do want to feel the emotion of the person. So you could be wary that that's spreading to you, like the colleague who left the work meeting negative. But you can then process that emotion yourself, say, this is what's happening, or I can go watch those videos. I can do whatever to then change my emotion again, right? So it's good for me to actually try to feel a bit of what they're feeling. Now I'm not going through it, so it's not going to sit with me as long, so I don't have to worry about that spreading. But it's good to feel at some level. That's what allows their mindset to open, because they feel there's something that's going on where they feel that you've connected with them in that way. But make sure, that's why the journaling, the other stuff is important, because you need to process and then change that emotion if you need it to be different as you go to the next group. So it was different, but I'll connect that back to what you were saying. Look, I think the biggest thing I already said, which is you're not going to be perfect at this. If it's new to you, let it be new to you. But experiment, try. It's way more important than we want to give it credit, especially in the uncertainty right now. And people are feeling so much more than they want to acknowledge, and they need your help as a leader to go through some of these different steps so that they can be mentally, they're cognitively their best self for you. Just be open to getting it wrong a few times and learn your way into it. Don't say, oh, well, that didn't go well, I'm just not good with people, blah, blah, blah. No. You can get better. Just try it and stay with it long enough.
Perfect. Well, Shawn, if people want to learn more about your work, okay, did I cut you off? I'm sorry.
No, I was going to go the same place you were going. And I was also just going to say, I think this has been a really important conversation. I think it matters a lot.
It really does. It really does. So, Shawn, if our listeners want to know more about the framework or working with you, how could they find out more?
So my website is leadingwithlift, all one word, .com. Quinn at leadingwithlift.com is my email for you. Feel free to reach out. If you don't mind, I don't necessarily have right now that article on my website, but I would love if, as part of when you post this, feel free to share the link to the one of the articles.
Perfect.
And I've got a couple others I can share with you as well that are different, not necessarily exactly that. I had 8 principles on leading through uncertainty that may be helpful, that hits on similar principles, but doesn't go through the framework. So I'll share a couple of resources with all of you that with the two of you that you can share with your community.
Fantastic. We love that. Kate, anything else for our listeners today?
No, I don't think so. Shawn, thank you so much. It's been this has been the longest podcast that we've recorded so far, and I think it just reflects our interest in this and how I just think it's very compelling and timely, and God knows it's needed. So thanks for the extensive conversation.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it.
Take care.
Thanks, Shawn.
Take care, Shawn. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to You Might Try This, brought to you by EDC and Edgewise Media. To learn more about the podcast, visit youmightTryThis.com or connect with us on social media.